I call the member Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I felt compelled to do a brief contribution to this debate after hearing Jonathan Young's contribution. In the 30 seconds or so that he spoke, he could not have been wrong in more ways. It was the entire 30 seconds was just completely wrong. It was concentrated wrongness, because the issue that Jonathan Young spoke about was cost recovery in the case of early childhood teachers. The first thing that he was wrong about is not all early childhood centres. In fact, the minority of early childhood centres are profit-making businesses. The vast bulk of early childhood services are community-based, and they are run by kindergartens or they're run by community organisations. They don't make any money, and so he was wrong in that regard. But the second thing, and the more important thing, is they don't pay teacher registration fees. The individual teachers pay the registration fees. So if the police are going to start cost recovery for police vetting for the purposes of teacher registration, that is not a transfer of cost onto an early childhood centre or even to a school. It is a transfer of cost onto every individual teacher in the country. Every individual teacher in the country will now have to pay more money to get police vetting in order to keep their registration up to date. And teachers aren't the only ones. In any profession where police vetting is required and where the employer doesn't pay the cost of it, this will be a transfer of cost onto ordinary, everyday New Zealanders. There are a multitude of voluntary organisations that require police vetting because there might be children or vulnerable people involved in that organisation. And it is right that we ask those community organisations to have that system in place, because it ensures the safety of children, young people, and that is what the police are there for. And it is absolutely legitimate for us to say to those people working in those environments, you should be police vetted, so that it's for their safety as well as for the safety of the people who are in their care or in their charge. Now, transferring that cost, in the case of voluntary organisations, will probably result in some people just saying, this is too difficult, I've got other ways that I can spend my time. In the case of teachers and those other professions where it is required, it's a direct increase in cost. Now, if I have to say this to the government, if they don't think that they're going to end up paying for this one way or the other, they've got another thing coming, because the teachers quite rightly will come back to the government in their next round of collective employment agreement negotiations and say, actually, the cost of our teaching, of us maintaining our teacher registration, has gone up, and we want the Crown to cover that by way of a salary increase. And that would be a perfectly legitimate thing for them to ask. Otherwise, they're going to be going backwards. They're going to be getting less money cash in hand for doing the same work. So it would be a pay cut. So it would be perfectly legitimate for them to say, we want the Crown to cover this, so the Crown is going to cover it one way or the other. This is actually very short-sighted. Now, the Labour Party is supporting this bill to Select Committee because there are some instances where we think cost recovery might be justified. In the case of major events, for example, where there are significant policing implications, where there is a cost to the police for what is primarily a profit-making event or function, there might be some legitimate reasons to go to those organisers and say, we want you to contribute to the cost of doing that. But that's legitimate. The part where we're going to people who have to be police vetted for the purposes of their job or for community involvement or whatever, that's simply unfair. That is a step too far. And if that's not addressed through the Select Committee process, I think it's very unlikely that the Labour Party would continue to support this bill through, because what this is it is the beginning of an introduction of user pays policing. And I don't see how that can possibly be justifiable or sustainable in the long term for this country. So I certainly won't be supporting a bill right the way through the process that transfers the cost of police vetting for something like teaching from the police, where it exists at the moment, and thereby the Crown, by extension, to the individual teachers. I think that would be manifestly unjust. I think it would inevitably result in teachers, and I'm using teachers as an example because there's a multitude of other professions which would be covered by this as well. I think that they would be very legitimately seeking to come back to the government and ask for that cost to be covered in other ways. Otherwise, what the government's doing is they're increasing the cost to hard-working New Zealanders, and they're basically taking the cost away from the government. That's not sustainable, and it's just not fair.